So we've formed a quorum as the appointed time. So this is a special meeting of the Health Services Panel, and the governor was to introduce to us the Medical Registration Amendment Bill 2017. And in the last term of LegCo, we discussed this bill. So can we now invite the Secretary and the government team to join us? That will be a clash of meetings, I know, but so please feel free to move around the meetings. So a warm welcome to the Secretary. Well, this meeting should last till 7 p.m. Because we have to hand over the meeting venue to another meeting, which is the long-term care services subcommittee meeting. So when you're settled, Secretary, please take us through the paper. Thank you, Chairman and members. I will not be talking too much about the paper. I don't have to say too much about the background. As we all know, before the end of the last term of LegCo, we didn't have enough time to scrutinize and pass the Medical Registration Amendment Bill 2016. So this time round, actually, in the interim period, we formed a tripartite platform, and we did a lot more communication. And for the Medical Registration Amendment Bill 2017, proposed this time, there are three parts again. But at the upfront, I would like to say this. Some stakeholders have given us their views, so I have to be very categorical here. The aim of the bill serves to do three things. It's not either one of them or two of them. Some stakeholders might say that, well, this is your objective, so as long as that can be achieved, then that's good enough. I must just say again that we want to achieve three objectives here. One is to approve applications for limited registration for a period from not exceeding 1 year to not exceeding 3 years. The second objective is to, through a host of legislative amendments, improve the complaint investigation of the Medical Council of Hong Kong and to enhance the complaint handling efficiency. And together with other administrative measures, we hope to shorten the time taken to handle complaints. 3, we will increase late membership in MCHK, and hopefully we want to enhance the transparency of the MCHK, its credibility as well. These three objectives are of equal importance. So I must say this upfront. Now, second, as to the content of the bill, as I said, concerning limited registration for doctors, in the 2016 Amendment Bill, we have set out the objective of doing so. And unfortunately, some stakeholders have misunderstood this objective, and consequently, there have been some rumors or incorrect speculation saying that the government would like to really open wide its door to allow all non-locally trained doctors to practice in Hong Kong without going through an examination in Hong Kong. So this is a total misunderstanding. So this time, we have set out our objective very clearly here, and that is we would just like to extend the validity period of limited registration from 1 year to 3 years. So I hope that you can all appreciate and understand that. We talk about non-locally trained doctors if they have they're working overseas, and we are just taking them on a 1-year contract, and or they have to be the registration has to be renewed once every year. Then that makes it difficult for these doctors to, say, work in Hong Kong for a certain period, and they can have a stable job here. So 3 years, we think, is a more appropriate period. The second thing, I will not go into detail, there will be a host of amendments to bring in more assessors, and we would also have better arrangements for the legal advisors, so that in respect of PIC's preliminary inquiry committees or preliminary investigation committee, and also in the inquiry, our effectiveness can be enhanced. The third point is about increasing lay membership. In the 2016 bill, we have asked that 4 extra lay members be added. This time, we are also proposing the same number of lay members. But the greatest difference this time round is that for these 4 lay members, they would be elected by the patient groups or nominated by the Consumer Council, and they do not have to be appointed by the chief executive. The Hong Kong Medical Council can accept the nominations and the election results, and they can appoint these 4 lay members. This proposal was made in response to some views expressed during the discussion on the Amendment Bill 2016. Some people from the medical sector have asked that the ratio of elected and nominated members in MCHK be maintained at 1-to-1. So if we do that, we will be having 18 members in MCHK who will be elected. Now, for the 2 members coming from the Hong Kong Academy of Medicine, there is still room for discussion. And as to how the HKAM will nominate and elect these 2 members, that is still subject to discussion. But I know that in the latter stage of the discussion of the Amendment Bill 2016, some representatives from the medical sector again said that the 1-to-1 ratio, what they mean by that is that number of elected doctor members should comprise half of the MCHK members. So that's a little bit different from our original proposal. And this proposal, in fact, means that the number of elected member doctors should comprise half of the MCHK. But then I must point out some of the facts as well. Now we have 14 elected doctor members. Apart from that, we still have 10 other doctor representatives at the MCHK. They are nominated, that's true. Some sectors of the medical sector may not agree to the proposal that we turn the nominated members of HKM into elected members. In any case, we're talking about 14 doctor members being elected. And then we have 8 to 10 doctors who are members of the MCHK. So ultimately, we still have 24 doctor members on the MCHK versus 8 lay members. So this is something that I will have to be extra clear about here. I and my team will be more than happy to answer members' questions. Thank you. Thank you, Secretary. You have taken us briefly through the paper. So 4 members, Alice Mack, Pierre Chan, Tommy Zhang, and Dr. Kwok Kaki, 5 minutes each. Ms. Alice Mack, Chairman. First of all, I hope that this bill can be passed as soon as possible. This is the common aspiration of the public and the patients and the patients' families. There's been such a backlog of cases at MCHK. The latest waiting time is 72 months. So to the patients or the patients' families or the doctors, this is so very unfair, because doctors say they have been complained against unreasonably. So if the hearing can be completed as soon as possible, then it will be best for the doctors concerned. The Secretary also said that there will be different amendments to the bill. So the first has to do with the inquiry on the proposal to increase substantially number of assessors. We agree to that, and there should be more resources devoted to the work of MCHK, including and hiring more legal advisors that can shorten the hearing time. Now, with regard to limited registration, I find it very strange. All members of the public and the lawmakers agree that for frontline doctors working at ICSHE, they are under tremendous pressure in their work. They have an onerous workload, and we hope that their work pressure can be eased. If we can extend the validity period of limited registration from 1 year to 3 years, then that can help doctors trained overseas to get employed at the ICSHE, and we hope that we can help ease the workload and pressure of doctors working in public hospitals. But then some locally trained doctors may be worried. Well, some people have actually said in this meeting room that some overseas doctors may not be measure up to the standards, and they are still allowed to work in Hong Kong. But I don't think that would be the case. And we don't think the standards of doctors' performance will be lowered. We hope that doctors with of high caliber can be brought into Hong Kong to ease pressure on frontline doctors.
Yes. Now we are all trying to help the medical authority, and we really would like to hear from them. We are just trying to help. Now they should come out and say and make a promise that our local doctors and our local people are assured that these overseas doctors are not doing administrative work, that they're only doing clinical work, helping the frontline doctors and nothing more, and will not be in the way of local doctors' promotion prospects. So I think the HK, the Hong Kong, the hospital authority should make this very, very clear, and not to let people use this as a kind of an excuse, making false claims that unqualified doctors are being hired to practice in Hong Kong. Now, I hope the Secretary can make it clear to everyone. This is, in fact, their stance. Now, on the lay members, now we are seeing that the government is making a significant compromise now regarding the choosing of doctors and so on, and the approval from the CE is not needed now for the HKAM election. Now it is the AM themselves deciding how to elect their own members, so doctors choosing their own doctors. So am I right? Secretary, please. Yes. I'd just like to respond on 2 points. First of all, on the HKAM, they are a statutory body, and they also set the criteria for specialist doctors and the criteria for their training. So in order to respect their professional autonomy, it is better for them to decide how to elect representatives, and the government does not have to make any appointment here. Now, to again respond to the member's point on limited registration. Now, again, let me clarify. Now, because last time in some of the forums, I was saddened to hear that some frontline doctors were extremely worried because they thought that the news or the ungrounded news they heard from the media that this limited registration arrangement being extended to 3 years has a kind of an aim to allow non-locally trained doctors to come to practice in Hong Kong, and thereby affecting the training of local doctors and their promotion prospects. So they appeared very, very worried. So let me say this once again. We do have a mechanism, a flexible one, to allow certain professions such as medical doctors, when there is a severe shortage, to allow non-locally trained doctors or other professionals to fill the gap on a temporary basis, so that we have time to train local talents. So this practice is common around the world. Now, for the Hong Kong limited registration arrangement for doctors, we make it very clear that there is a time limit. These medical doctors will not be automatically registered to practice in Hong Kong. And if we give them, let's say, 1 year or even up to 3 years of limited registration, they may not be given an extension, and they have to leave Hong Kong if they want to practice. And secondly, if approved, they have to work at a specified location. So that would be the 2 universities and the HKHA, and that's the Department of Health. And the hospital authority will not employ a fresh graduate. We are asking for applicants with experience and who can work independently. And only these people can help to relieve our manpower shortage. And when the supply is now able to meet the demand, then we can stop the scheme anytime we want. In other words, there will not be any long-term impact on the medical manpower. So this kind of flexibility is ideal. And in fact, without this arrangement, the government has only to resort to one other option, and that is to try to recruit as much as possible for the public hospitals, or to use the private practice doctors to help the HA to work as part-timers, or to have some sort of a joint venture between the private and the public practice. And apart from these very limited options, we have no choice. We can only train the local doctors locally, and this in the long run would in fact upset the balance of such talents. Now, I'd like to ask, or to repeat the question, that only clinical work be given and not administrative work. Now, I can say that now the hiring of these limited practice doctors, they have to go through the specialist division's consultation whether there is such a shortage, to the extent that we are willing to introduce overseas specialist doctors. If a certain specialism, now if among themselves they feel that they can cope, the HA will not unilaterally hire specialists for that particular specialism. So our aim is definitely to help with the clinical requirements. Thank you, Chair. Now, the officials here, well, two of you may not be here after July 1st. And now, Dr. Koh, I'd just like to say to you that the practice you've been doing would have a lot of impact on Hong Kong for the next 1 or 2 decades. Now, you've said in public that the number of medical students has increased, but then the medical expenses is not growing proportionately. Now, after your departure, this will no longer be your concern. But it may be a situation where graduates will not be able to find a job. And what about medical insurance? And you are also not laying any restrictions on the cosmetics industry or even the pharmaceutical companies. They are not being regulated enough. Now, you mentioned several mistakes or errors. Now, for the limited registration, you say that this scheme can stop any time. Now, in a Legislative session, questions was raised about how many limited registered doctors have been practicing for more than 10 years or even more than 20 years on an annual renewal basis, and that we don't have enough funds for that, and then we will have to give them a kind of a golden handshake. Now, so the flexibility that you mentioned, is it really true, looking back at our recent history? Now, there might be other examples, but I don't want to dwell on it. Now, again, on limited registration, whether it is really flexible, what I heard is that it is not really that flexible. Now, in the paper F3261/92, in other words, today's submission, on page 11, in section 4.4, or to repeal everything after practitioners, and then also section 3(2). Now, because last year the controversy was the formation of the Medical Council as well as the limited registration arrangement. Now that 1 year has gone by, and come summer, when we have a new term of legislative session and also the tripartite discussion, Now, the 2016 bill and the 2017 bill, the wording are identical. Now, in other words, the controversial sections, now one on the patient's complaint handling mechanism. Now, the doctors also want to speed it up. Now, after 2016, we now have a new bill. You have increased the number of assessors. Now, we feel that, okay, this is going to speed things up. So this is on the patient's side. Now, but what about doctors themselves? What is their concern and the controversy? The 2 points I mentioned, the formation of the medical council as well as the limited registration. Now, the wordings are exactly the same. In other words, no matter how much time we put into this, the government is still unmoved. Now, I was referring to the earlier pages just now. How come the controversies issues, the wordings remain the same? So these are my questions. Now, Chair, now on the first point, now the order may not be exactly the same as what Mr. Chan outlined. That is on limited registration, the flexibility for the doctor's arrangements. I'm not sure I go along with Mr. Chan. He was saying that some limited registered doctors, they have been hired for a very long time, meaning that the flexibility is in doubt. I want to say that these limited registered doctors or their recruitment depends on their individual posts. Now, in universities, for example, they do not have time, they do not have suitable people to fill those posts. Let's say for research, training, and if the shortage remains, they can come to the medical council and with some justification. And if approved by the medical council, then these people can continue to work. Now, but what I'm saying is, given the overall shortage of manpower, and when we reach a stage where there is enough manpower, then the flexibility kicks in. Unless, of course, you give us examples or mechanisms that would, better than this one.
And I said that that can stop any time, but of course we have to go by the contractual terms. Now, as long as the contract expires, then we can stop the employment at any time. The doctors on limited registration must come with certain qualifications and work experience, but they don't have to be very experienced. So, if we can train up enough local doctors, the locally trained doctors can take up the work of the doctors on limited registration at XJ. So if the need is no longer there, the scheme can be stopped. And if they think that there is a need for the post to exist, then they can apply to the MCHK, and as long as they've got the right reasons, the approval will be given. Now, in future, in particular in the public healthcare system, can we employ all graduate doctors? Later on, we will be announcing a review report on the strategic deployment of healthcare professionals, and from that report, you will see that we will still be facing a staff shortage problem in the mid to long term. And at various occasions, I have also said that the government has this policy and that is the best arrangement for graduates from the 2 medical schools in Hong Kong is for them to be hired, say, at the DH or HA, and after they've undergone some training, of course, provided that the doctors are willing to undergo that training, then after they've been trained up, then they can practice in the private sector. So the government's policy is that the HA and the 2 medical schools can employ all the doctor graduates in that in the prevailing year. Dr. Chang has asked who will stay after 1st of July. I'm not going to comment on that, but I am the permanent secretary today, speaking on behalf of the government, and this is a continuing policy of the government. So I'm not speaking in my own personal capacity. Will the PS please supplement? About limited registration, you can refer to Annex E and also the appendix. Apart from the MCHK looking at the limited registration system, in the HA, CUHK, and Hong Kong U, they do have their own mechanisms on bringing in these doctors in terms of the first recruitment exercise and also continuing employment. They do have their own mechanisms to do the assessment. Can I be allowed to say something more? I haven't finished yet. All right, please, later on. So that's all right, because several other members would like to ask a question. Dr. Chen, you haven't responded to Dr. Chen's question on why there is no difference between the 16 and 17 version of the bill. Mr. Tommy Zhang, I don't mind having the secretary going on in his response. And I don't even mind giving all my time to him for him to respond. Anyway, the doctors will declare that they are doctors, and I would declare that my daughter and my son-in-law are overseas doctors. And so, well, I would make that clear because I don't want to be criticized as I'm speaking for the interest of my daughter and daughter-in-law. But they've told me that they're not going to practice in Hong Kong after the umbrella movement. Anyway, in the past 1 year or so, Chairman, back then, I've asked for my private bill to be passed, but then after that, the chief executive and the government have shown great determination in passing or drawing up the bill for the overall good of Hong Kong people. They want to have this medical reform or the reform of the MCHK. Don't say that the CE will step out of his office soon and they're not doing anything. No, that's not the case. So you can see that the very special way that our fellow members speak in. And the secretary and his team have spent a lot of time working on this bill. Just now, the sector's representatives said that it was a waste of time. The tripartite platform was discussing this for several months, and we are not inching forward a bit. But I think our fellow members are also moving goalposts all the time. In the past, they had an issue with the HKAM, and now they have an issue with different things. And they are now saying that maybe the representatives from the 2 medical schools should be elected by the doctors themselves. I was on a radio program last night, but do you think that that will undermine the institutional autonomy of the universities? Why do they have to listen to you? Should the doctors or the public at large teach or instruct the universities what to do? So they said that the doctors should have all the say. So every member should be elected by the doctors. Secretary, I think the same doctor should not have a vote, say, in the MA or AM. So we are talking about the same pool of voters. So all the representatives are being elected by the same pool of doctors. So that's not how democracy should work. They've got so many doctors in HKAM, and the same doctor from HKAM, maybe the same doctor member in the HKMA, and they are also working in the hospital authority. So they have multiple roles. So that works to the best of their interest, right? So one doctor should not be allowed to have too many votes. Now we talk about the election committee, and the pan-democratic members have been criticizing FC members here all the time, and they said that we are not in order in our, and so on, and so forth. And they said that we are very bad. So I would not be criticizing the representative of the medical functional constituencies. And what about the geographical institutions? Should they have all the say? And they say that GCs are good and FCs are bad, and so on. And they said that if mainland doctors are allowed to practice in Hong Kong, then local doctors will not have a job, and they might easily run into medical blunders and so on. So all these are really nonsensical. So I'm not going to speak anymore. So thank you, Mr. Zhang. The Secretary doesn't have the time to respond. Maybe he will have time later on to respond. Dr. Kokaki. Chairman, I was on the tripartite platform myself. I was seeing how the developments went. I don't think the tripartite platform works effectively. I'm quite disappointed by their work. They haven't had in-depth discussions on issues. So that was the case for every meeting of the tripartite platform. For the tripartite platform, it couldn't fulfill its role. Anyway, the government is now proposing this package on, say, the proposal of increasing the number of legal advisors and PICs to shorten the inquiry time. I am agreeable to that. But the biggest problem is on how to maintain professional autonomy. I think the difference now lies in the proposal on the HKAM. You are now asking the HKAM to elect their own members in their own way. Now you are actually putting HKAM on the spotlight here. In fact, in my amendment in the last legislative session, I didn't single HKAM out for further reform. The amendment was that the representatives from the HA, Hong Kong U, CU, and HKAM, we hope that the representatives from these institutions, one of the seats from them will be elected by all doctors. Now, if the government has accepted my amendment back then, there would not be so much controversy. And now, the government is staging a fight against us. It is insisting on its own way, and it would not accept our proposal. HKAM has been frank about its rules and ways, and they said that the government's proposal is not right, and they've even asked for more seats to be allocated to them. They said this openly. And second, they asked that the government should refrain from instructing them how to go about in voting the members. So the government, if you respect HKAM, you should let AM to go about in its own way. So ultimately, there is no addition in the number of member doctors, and there is no addition in the number of lay members either. So why is the government having this proposal? So does it mean that the government will still want to have control over the matter? And you don't want to say, let the doctors have professional autonomy. And this is something that has baffled me. And also I noticed that there will be a lot more assessors. In the past few years, for the cases handled by MCHK, actually, for many of the cases, they have been the decisions or rulings have been dismissed by a higher level of court, say the Court of Appeal. Now, if we increase the number of assessors, but some of them may not have the necessary qualifications to do their work. So are you worried that the decisions of the MCHK will be subject to more challenges in the future? And as a result, their workload will increase, their credibility will be undermined. And, of course, we don't mind non-locally trained doctors practicing in Hong Kong, but going by the government's figures, for mainland doctors on limited registration here, well, the number is quite large. They ranks second in terms of the different countries of doctors practicing here in Hong Kong. So why is that the case? Secretary, I would like to say several things. First, the medical sector emphasizes professional autonomy. As a member of the sector, I also agree that professional medical autonomy is very important. But how do we realize that, or how that can be manifested? I think it's a matter of opinion. And I've pointed out more than once that in other jurisdictions, say for example the UK, their medical council, well, half of them are members. Half of the members are doctors, but they are not elected among the doctors themselves. The second point, Dr. Kwok referred to the proposal on HKAM, and he was saying that we are neither here or nor there in our proposal, but I don't agree with that. If I remember correctly, for these two doctors nominated by HKMA, we're now proposing them to be elected. That was not a proposal in the Amendment Bill 2016. It was only after we introduced the Amendment Bill 2016 and we heard further views from the doctors, and that the doctors have asked for this +2 and -2 proposal. So that was a proposal made in response to that proposal of the doctors. So this came not from us, but from the doctors. And later on, we discussed this, and these two doctors will be elected by HKMA. How is the election going to be like? Will they be elected by all doctors or members of the HKAM? We did discuss that, and we have explained our stance to the medical sector which accepted our explanation. We have to respect the HKAM. They represent all the specialist doctors, and they are an authoritative body. And they don't think they need instructions from us. They are a statutory body, and they should have the right to decide on the election method. I don't know where Dr. Kwok got the sector's views from. Because there has been an increase in the number of members of HKAM, it's right that they ask for more seats in the MCHK. Now, if we want to add in the number of lay members, and if we don't add in the number of doctor members, and that would not be in the spirit of our amendment. So it's very difficult for us to accede to the request that the number of representatives from HKAM be increased. So does that the HKAM accept our proposal?
Now I have written to the tripartite platform, and HKAM accepted it, even though they did not make the suggestion. So I'd just like to clarify this point. And Chair, if you would allow me, I would just say a couple more points. Now, Dr. Kwok mentioned that with an increased number of assessors, we want to ensure that the assessors be trained, especially on the legal procedures, so that they can discharge their duties properly. Dr. Cole, one more point that Dr. Kwok raised on the limited registration and the training about doctors from the mainland. I don't quite get it. I mean, same here, Mr. Chair. So now, as far as I know, the limited registered doctors, very few of them are mainland trained. Yes, please go on. Member Chan talked about the 2016 and the 2017 registration document. The wordings remain the same, especially on the HKAM's point, the two members. My understanding is different. Now, throughout the 2016 exercise, there were many controversies, including some which should not be controversial, but again kind of magnified by some people. Now, but no matter what, now as I said at the beginning, the points raised by doctors concerning the 2 seats of the HKAM be changed to appointed members from the original elected members. Now, this has to do with the initial ratio between elected and appointed members. Now, I want to say this again, and again, the records will make it clear. Now, the original ratio, the original proposal did not include a kind of a guarantee that the appointed members should form at least 50% of the forum, or the elected members should form 50% of the overall figure. Now, I am saying that the government is now relinquishing itself of the appointment power of 4 lay members. So even if you're not counting the AM members, there will be 18 members of the MCHK not appointed via the Hong Kong government. And this is in fact the biggest point. Now, if part of the, or some of the doctors' representatives feel that they must have at least 50%, and not just doctors, but doctors electing their own representatives, not counting all the other members. In other words, the appointed members or the those selected by the AM. Now, even ruling those out, there will still be the 50%. Now, if we have to handle this particular point as well, now some of the patients' representatives, they will not accept a professional autonomy, meaning that 50% of the seats in the council be their own doctors of their own choosing. Now, appointed doctors are also representatives of doctors. Now, if you look at the counterpart in the UK, half of the doctors, there are half are lay members. Those doctors are not appointed or elected among doctors themselves. So that's why I'm having difficulty dealing with some of the doctors' recommendations or suggestions that in the MC, half of them are doctors selected among themselves and not counting the 10 other doctors in the committee. Now, I will not be able to explain or answerable to the public. Now, I hope the doctors would appreciate the difficulties I'm facing. And also, from the public's angle, a professional autonomy has to be respected. That's fine. But at the same time, we have to consider public expectation and public interest. In other words, there should be a balance between the various stakeholders. Okay, thank you. Now, we're just having a superficial discussion today and not anything in depth. Okay. Yes, Mrs. Ip, yes, I support the bill because I think we should speed up the processing of the complaints handling mechanism and also to solve the problem of the shortage of manpower. Now, can we ask for more information from the Secretary and your department? Is it true that there are 300 vacancies to be filled? Because you said that only 30 were recruited over the years, and because the limited registration is only for 1 year and you cannot really recruit enough people. Now, in the past, we've heard from many doctors' representatives as well as Legislative members that, okay, if we allow this, then the floodgates are wide open, and then there will be a lot of mainland doctors flooding in. But we're happy to hear from Dr. Cole that this is in fact not the case. Now, maybe there are figures that I overlooked. Now, these limited registered doctors in Hong Kong, now how many are they and where are they posted? Universities, Department of Health or HA, and where are they from? And how many have worked more than 10 years? So this will give us some figures when we have to explain to others. Thank you for your question, Mrs. Ip. Now, the vacancies in the HA, now the number of vacancies varies depending on the time of the cycle. Usually, the peak is in June because at that time, or around about July, the doctors will have to decide whether they would continue. And so the vacancy we've been looking at in the last 2-3 years is about 200 to 300. Now, if you look at it in July, the vacancies are smaller. But at the end of the cycle, round about June, when you don't have the following fresh graduate doctors finishing their intern training, the figure is hovers about 200 to 300. That's the number of vacancies. In percentage terms, the gap is about 3 or 4%. So given the overall figure of 5,000 to 6,000 doctors. Now, on the limited registered doctors, let me just say that this is rare in the Department of Health. For universities, they have their own research work to do and clinical work to do. They need specialists. And I put those aside now, but just focusing on the hospital authority, then yes, we can provide those figures. Now, you will notice that in Appendix 2 of the paper, we have given the figures. You would see that for the HA on registered, limited registered doctors, and we have the UK, Australia, New Zealand, the US and Canada, and not from the mainland. Now, for the HKU and CHA, the number of such people they employ are from non-mainland China. So all the figures are given there. I don't know, maybe I don't have the proper set of papers. I'll give you papers afterwards. It's in the thick pile, Annex E. Yes, we've got a table there. Yes. Now, that being the case, if we extend the limited registration period from 1 year to 3, is it the case that it will be easier to recruit? Do you have a waiting list, a long waiting list, or is it because people are scared by the very short 1 year period? Let's put it this way. Now, the goal, it's very difficult to say for sure that the limited registration scheme can fill all the vacancies, i.e. the 200 or 300 vacancies. So the HA, when we discussed with them, they wanted to, or they were only able to hire a dozen or so.
So after the relaxation, we hope to bring in, say, 50 to 60 doctors. Roughly, that is the figure. It's difficult to come up with an exact figure. Even if they hire more, say from 10 to increase number from 10 to 40 to 50, that can help with certain specialties. So we will do our best and try to render as much help as possible. Secretary, this is not a relaxation per se. It is not renewing the contract year by year. You have a longer contract lasting for 3 years, and that will be more attractive to them because they can stay longer. Well, this is just a common sense. If, say, a non-locally trained doctor has a job overseas, if she or she comes to work in Hong Kong, well, let's not talk about contract. Actually, we are discussing with the MCHK on whether we can extend the contract period for 3 years or so. Anyway, they still have to renew on the registration on an annual basis. So they get worried. If they have to resign from their overseas job and then return to Hong Kong to work, then they would, then they say stand the risk of whether their registration will be extended 1 year later. So that would be better if the period is extended to 3 years. We believe that our proposal can help HA hire more doctors on limited registration, but the number is that it will not be able to fill all the vacancies that we have now. Dr. Fernando Zhang, Chairman, I hope that the bill can be enacted and implemented as soon as possible. We want to enhance the MCHK in handling complaints. We have to, the MCHK has to deal with complaint cases. In some overseas jurisdiction, the functions are being taken up by different bodies. I mean, the complaint handling function and also the disciplinary functions. And I know that if we are to do that, then it may be a bit difficult. The bill didn't get passed in the last legislative session. So if we have the chance to do it again, we should do a more thorough job. My greatest concern is that if we talk about accountability, disciplinary hearings, and so on, many overseas jurisdictions are relying on lay members, and in some cases, the lay members are the mainstay in the composition. For the MCHK, well, in fact, lay members should comprise over half of the members in MCHK. Now they are having lay members taking up a quarter of the seats of the MCHK. You talk about increasing the number of assessors. Would you be increasing particularly the number of lay assessors so that at least at the PIC stage, well, they will comprise over half of the members in the PIC? That can enhance transparency and accountability. And I think this is very important. And people have also expressed a concern in relation to the proposal to change the 2 nominated seats of HKAMA to elected seats. I don't think it makes any difference, because we're talking about the 7,000 doctors who were nominating them to representatives themselves. You are just doing away with the appointment by the CE, and you are asking the HAM to choose their own election method. So we are dubious as to whether it is really an elected seat instead of a nominated seat. I think it will be better if we further increase the ratio of lay members. But anyway, this is the proposal is a progress, now a step forward. But then you are not going far enough. Well, since we are starting afresh this exercise, shouldn't we be making more improvement this time? I would very much like to respond to Dr. Zhang's questions. First, Dr. Zhang is right. For the 2 nominated seats of HKAM being turned into elected seats. How is it going to work, actually? It hinges on the HKAM's own decision, how they're going to elect their members. But having said that, I don't agree with your remark that it doesn't make a difference. Well, Dr. Chang, let me remind you, let's get back to the original intent of this exercise. Why was the sector proposing this +2 -2 option, and that is to turn the 2 nominated seats into elected seats? The biggest reason, well, let me tell you here, because back then someone said that if they are going to be elected by the CE, they are worried that these appointed members will be maneuvered or controlled by the government. So your time's up. Well, nobody remembers these anymore. I didn't want to talk about this, but since Dr. Zhang asked this question, I was sort of compelled to mention this again. Is there a big difference here? Secretary, please don't digress. Well, let the bygones be bygones. Now, should we model after overseas practices? And that is, there should be a body independent of independent of MCHK which will work on disciplinary matters. I don't see any major reason in objecting to this. This entails legislation, but then we don't want to do this. We want to speed things up, and we want to achieve the 3 objectives I mentioned through amending the existing legislation. For those who are still advocating this proposal of yours, I hope that they can understand that if we still mention this in this discussion and cite this as a reason for objecting the amendment bill, that will only make it impossible for the amendment to be passed. Of course, you may say that we can still wait longer to overcome the odds and establish a body independent of MCHK to do all the disciplinary work and so on. No, I don't agree with that. I think the proposal that we have on hand is worth exploring, and we try that out first and see how it goes. And this time round, we are proposing a different approach, actually. Originally, the MCHK was supposed to be the disciplinary body, and now we are proposing that the MCHK be delegating its disciplinary power to different panels and committees comprising different members. So that adds a degree of independence to the whole proceedings. And I agree, maybe some assessors may not be qualified enough to be assessors. So in terms of training, we should provide them with training, say in the legal procedures and so on. And if that can be done, I think the degree of independence can be enhanced. For the assessors, the number of lay assessors, can I defer to the Permanent Secretary to provide the figures? As what the Secretary said, for the complaint handling and disciplinary proceedings proposed under the bill, there will be a number of panels and committees dealing with those, and they will be established under the MCHK. Now, in terms of the assessors, the number will be increased. There will be the maximum of 140 assessors. 60 of them will be lay assessors. They can be nominated by, say, certain organizations, including Bar Association, Law Society of Hong Kong, Council of Social Service, Hong Kong Institution of Certified Public Accountants, etc. For the PIC, our proposal is that among the 7 members, the lay members should be 3 in number, and that is an increase from the present 1. And for the disciplinary inquiry stage, 5 members, of the 5 members, 2 will be lay members. So that's an addition from the existing arrangement. So the chairman of the PIC or the disciplinary inquiry stage, they can be the MCHK member or the assessor, and is appointed by the MCHK. So in terms of the design of the PICs and the disciplinary inquiry committee, the chairman may not necessarily be the MCHK member. Secretary, some people objected to the proposal, saying that if they are going to be appointed by the CE, then these people will be controlled by the CE. I must stress that we beg to differ. Sector actually said that they found this kind of remark very repugnant. Even if I am appointed as a member of the MCHK by the CE, I'm nominated by the statutory body, and I represent the sector, and I have my own professional autonomy. So the government doesn't agree to the suggestion that members appointed by the CE are definitely going to be controlled by the CE. So let's try to discuss things out and try to forge a consensus. So we can discuss the numbers further on at the Bills Committee stage. And if you are not happy with the proposal, you can move amendments. We are having an initial discussion here today only.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I support the bill. Now, for the doctors, now they may not buy this completely, but then if we procrastinate, then the backlog would just grow, and this is not a good thing. I hope we can all be frank in our discussion. Now, I do have some worry though. Last year there were rumors flying around and causing some panic among some sectors, and some people changed their mind at the last minute. I believe this may happen this year. And Dr. Koh, you have been doing this for a long time, and you have handled rumors in the past. And I believe you have to explain, especially to the young doctors. And you are one of them, right? You are a doctor. And if they don't trust you, I don't know who they would trust. Yes, now I just like to ask Dr. Koh, now again, this is almost the end of the legislative year, and there might be people who move from supporting you to not supporting you. And what are you going to do? What plan B do you have? Thank you for your question. Well, in terms of time, this is more or less the same period as in last year. But in this year, 2017, the problems we are facing are not the same as last year when we were discussing the Medical Registration Amendment Bill 2016. Because last year, we had to follow the legislative term, and we had to start a new term last year, and if it was not passed in that old term, then everything were to start again. But this year is different. Even though the present government would have done its work by June 30th, But from now until June the 30th, we probably don't have enough time for the Bills Committee to scrutinize the bill and to come back for second and third reading. But the LegCo itself has 3 more years to run. This bill can continue even though the government has changed. So I am confident that even though when we have a new government in place in July, the main scrutinizer is LegCo, and LegCo does have this continuity to scrutinize the bill. And I have heard so far the reactions given. So for this Amendment Bill 217, the response was pretty positive. So even though we have a new government, the LegCo can continue to scrutinize this bill, and I am confident that this be passed earlier rather than later. Now, I just like to be on record that I support this bill. Now, we have to hand over the venue at 4, and we have done our first round of questions. There are 3 who want to ask, and I hope you would be very, very brief, okay? And then the Secretary will respond after all have spoken. Okay, 2 minutes. Now, Dr. Koh said that if we look at the UK's counterparts formation, now in fact our tripartite platform has discussed this. Now if you use the UK example, it's not appropriate. I mean they are a country, and the government is an elected government, and the government is using different countries as examples when you're talking different things. Sometimes you refer to Japan, sometimes you use to Spain, and then sometimes you use examples from Singapore. Now, to answer Mrs. Ip's question, if I were to answer her, okay, mainland doctors, they are not in the minority. They're in fact the majority. Now, why do I say that? If you look at the Annex C, I'll just read it out. You have 2012 to 2016 for the medical examination. Every year, you have 100 and 200 taking these exams. More than half are from the mainland. This is point 1. Number 2, the limited registration doctors. Now, for the countries where they come from, now apart from the UK, well, the mainland comes a very close second. So they are not a small number. And most of them would actually be using these doctors in the universities. They are not frontline doctors, and they are not relieving the heavy workload of public hospitals. Fernando Cheung's not here, but his question is that for independent bodies, we have asked for survey that in fact the doctors are in favor of being independent. So I mean that's all from me for the time being. So if members, if you are not clear or if not happy, then you can ask the gentleman after the meeting. I'd like to hear from Dr. Koh how he responds to Dr. Chan. Now I'd like to ask, now for last year, some doctors suggested, Dr. Choi Kin said that if you are an expert, you are not really compensated. I mean, the bundle is very thick, but then there is no initiative for these people to give you priority. And then what about assessors? Do they get honorariums? I mean, these assessors, I mean, you're using their expertise. Do they get any reward? The assessors, I mean, they have heavy workload because the case can go on for a long time and you cannot quit halfway. So assessors have to spend a lot of time. do you give them any honorarium? Thank you for your question. Oh, Dr. Kwok is back now. Dr. Kwok, you have 2 minutes. Now, I heard from Dr. Cole. I do not doubt your sincerity. Now, there is a difference in opinion, though. Now, given this spectrum of opinions, now I hope that the chasm doesn't get wider as a result of your amendment. Now, obviously, we're going to discuss this in more in-depth way later on, and there may be further amendments. Now, what is your plan? Now, if everything stays the same, this bill is not really helping. So my question for the administration, now from now until the setting up of the Bills Committee, how are you going to continue with this work? Now, the present government will step down very soon, and we don't know who is going to take up the seats. So, well, there is an issue of continuity there, in spite of what you said earlier. Now, on the HKAM issue, now how they elect or select their members, now the bill is silent on this part. I wanted to say back then that it's not really for them to choose any way they want, but we don't have time, okay, to discuss here. Is it to allow them to elect among themselves any way they like? Now, I think this is a kind of a loophole and is unnecessary, and you are not really facilitating things for the restructuring of the MCHK. Now, to follow on the members' questions, now Mrs. Ip, the honorarium. Now, there are 2 parts to that. If they are medical experts, and at the request of the MCHK to give expert testimony or to write reports, then we have a special vote to allow the MCHK to give these experts honorarium. Now, for the experts, the honorarium given is not proportional to the sort of or comparable to the kind of expert work they would have done elsewhere. Now, but for assessors, I mean, there is no such arrangement in place. But we could discuss that. But at the time, for the time being, there is no such arrangement or any honorariums for assessors. So they are volunteers. I believe what you said is very reasonable, but we have to discuss this further. Dr. Kwok, the HKAM, now I believe that they have different ways to elect among themselves, but this is going to be responded to or interpreted very differently by different people. We respect their autonomy and their professional status, so we respect their own decisions, but we are not ruling out any arrangement. Now, as to what would be done as follow-up measures, now let me just say this. I feel very much in the same way as Dr. Kwok about what is going to be done after the new term has started doing their work. Now, obviously, they will have to continue where we left off. Now, the arrangement this year is different from the arrangement last year. But it doesn't mean that I can speak on behalf of the next government or the incoming government. Now, the long title of the bill is less restrictive than last time. And I believe this will allow the Bills Committee, now given that everybody agrees, then they would have a freer hand. Okay, Mr. Chan's 2 points. Now, first of all, now, for the limited registered doctors, if we hire doctors for the hospital authority, if we focus our attention there, and you've been paying attention to our figures, and I'm sure, Mrs. Ip, you've been noticing that, there are basically no such doctors graduating from the mainland. But of course, if they are suitable, the hospital authority can scrutinize each and every one of them. We are not basing our decision on where they are from. They are answerable to us. In other words, the people they choose must be qualified. Now, and the fact is that the HA hiring doctors on a limited basis are from countries other than the mainland. Now, for universities, I don't think this is in any contradiction with what Mr. Chan said. The experts required by universities are not the same as those needed by the HA. So it is quite possible that the universities would be looking for people who are not readily available, and they are forced to continue with having the people they have at hand. And again, you have to remember that the MCHK must give its approval. Now, for the HA, on these limited registered doctors, apart from specialisms having a shortage, now what about the selection committee? Now, they have HKAM representatives. Right, yes, and also, now Mr. Chan's point on me selectively choosing other countries as examples, and I don't believe this is the case. Now, in the papers that we produce for Singapore, let's say, the 25 members, the counterpart, 12 are elected, just short of half. Now, for Australia, now, of the 12 members, 8 are doctors, but all are appointed by the government. Okay, so Dr. Koh has responded. So you can look at the chart in Annex E. Now, we do have to leave the venue by 4, and we have overrun already. Now, you still have the chance to discuss this at length in the Bills Committee, and also other questions and so on. You can ask Dr. Koh again, and I have to hand over the venue to the next meeting. Thank you very much, and meeting adjourned.